It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning at Westfield High, one of the most prestigious schools in Austin, Texas. The hallways buzzed with life, students laughing, gossiping, and hurriedly finishing last-minute homework. Some leaned against their lockers, deep in conversation, while others rushed to their classrooms before the bell rang. But for Jacob Miller, this day felt different. A strange, uneasy feeling sat heavy in his chest. Jacob wasn't like most of the students at Westfield. While his classmates came from wealthy families, doctors, lawyers, and big-time business owners, he was the grandson of a farmer. His mornings didn't start with warm breakfasts and chauffeur rides. Instead, they began before the sun rose, with hands buried in soil, feeding animals, and carrying out farm duties before school. His boots still carried the faint scent of the earth, a silent testament to the hard work he put in before even stepping into the school building. Yet, it wasn't just his background that made him different. Jacob was a quiet kid. He didn't waste words on meaningless chatter. But in a school like this, silence was an open invitation for mockery. As he entered his history class, he felt the sharp, judgmental gaze of Miss Whitmore, a teacher known for her high expectations and even higher arrogance. Her presence alone could make the most confident student shrink. She thrived on discipline, order, and a strict belief that intelligence was a privilege, not a right. The lesson began, but Jacob found himself struggling to keep up. The exhaustion from waking up before dawn weighed on him like an anchor. His mind felt sluggish, clouded by fatigue, and before he knew it, Miss Whitmore had called on him. "Mr. Miller," she snapped, arms crossed over her chest. "Tell me, what strategic advantages did the Union Army have in the Civil War?" Jacob blinked, scrambling to gather his thoughts. But before he could answer, "If you spent half as much energy paying attention as you do, whatever it is you do in the fields, maybe you wouldn't embarrass yourself like this," she scoffed. The classroom erupted into quiet snickers. Jacob's face burned, but he bit his tongue. Miss Whitmore wasn't done. "Honestly, I don't see the point in wasting my time on students who clearly aren't cut out for academics," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe you should stick to what you know best, feeding pigs and plowing dirt." Silence. Even the students who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably. The insult was too cruel, too personal. Jacob's hands tightened into fists. Slowly, he rose from his seat, his voice calm but firm. "I may not be as book-smart as the rest, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve respect." Miss Whitmore smirked. "Then prove it. Or leave my classroom." The words cut deep, but Jacob didn't argue. Without another word, he grabbed his backpack and walked out, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so humiliated. The next morning, a scene no one expected. The sun cast golden hues over the school as students carried on with their usual morning routines. But something was different. A strange rumbling sound echoed through the air. Then came the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of helicopter blades. Students and teachers rushed outside, eyes wide with shock. A sleek, black helicopter descended onto the school's football field, its polished exterior gleaming under the morning sun. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was inside? What was happening? The doors swung open, and out stepped a tall, commanding figure in a tailored suit. His presence alone demanded respect. It was James Miller, Jacob's grandfather. But he wasn't just any farmer. His name was known all over Texas, not just for his massive farmland, but for his multi-million-dollar agribusiness empire. He had revolutionized sustainable farming, supplying organic produce to top-tier restaurants and major grocery chains across the country. And right behind him, Jacob. This time he walked with his shoulders squared, his head high. The school fell into stunned silence. Even Miss Whitmore, usually composed, looked visibly shaken. James Miller strode into the building, his deep, authoritative voice carrying through the halls. "I understand there was an issue with my grandson in your class yesterday." Miss Whitmore blinked rapidly, suddenly looking far less confident. "And Mr. Miller, I assure you, I treat all my students equally." James narrowed his eyes. "Is that so?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check. "Because this school receives a significant amount of funding from the Miller Foundation. I personally funded the science lab you take so much pride in. I also sponsor the history program you oversee. He stepped closer, his voice lowering just enough to send chills down her spine. And yet, you saw fit to humiliate my grandson because of where he comes from? Miss Whitmore's face turned ghostly pale. James continued, his tone unwavering. I raised Jacob to understand that hard work is honorable. Maybe you should educate yourself on that before looking down on the very people who put food on your table. The murmurs in the crowd grew. Some students nodded. Others exchanged glances of admiration toward Jacob. Finally, Jacob stepped forward. His voice was steady, yet resolute. I don't need special treatment. He looked Miss Whitmore directly in the eyes. I just want to be treated with the same respect as anyone else. Miss Whitmore swallowed hard. For the first time, she looked defeated. She nodded stiffly. I understand. I apologize, Jacob. A small, satisfied smile tugged at James Miller's lips.
Good.
Because respect isn't given based on wealth or status. He looked around, making sure every student heard him loud and clear. It's earned through integrity and hard work. And my grandson? He is both. The students erupted into cheers, some even clapping. For the first time, Jacob wasn't just the quiet farm boy. He was respected. And as for Miss Whitmore, she never underestimated another student again.